¿Está encendido? Sí, sí. Vamos a empezar la sesión. Ante todo, quiero excusar a la presidenta de la sección, la profesora y académica de número, doña Encarnación Roca, porque justo a última hora nos ha indicado que le era imposible asistir y tenía una enorme ilusión y un gran interés por asistir a la ponencia del profesor Karim Beñeklev. Formamos la mesa, el profesor Karim Beñeklev a mi derecha, la profesora Candela Llopis, secretaria de la sección, a mi izquierda. Y ante todo les doy a todos la bienvenida a la academia. Muchos de ustedes ya han participado en sesiones de esta sección, algunos lo hacen por primera vez, pero en cualquier caso, la bienvenida a todos ustedes. Esta es una sesión más de la sección de Derecho y TIC de la Real Academia Española de Jurisprudencia y Legislación, que se organiza junto con la South European Union Google Data Governance Chair y un proyecto de investigación financiado por el Ministerio. Es para nosotros un enorme honor y es una satisfacción contar hoy con el profesor Karim Beñeklev. Thank you very much for coming, dear Karim. Va a hacer su exposición en inglés, aunque sé que entiende perfectamente español. You can understand perfectly Spanish. Bien, leer el currículum del profesor Karim Beñeklev nos llevaría la mitad de la sesión. He tenido que seleccionar algunos de sus más relevantes méritos, que como digo, son muchos. Es profesor de la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Montreal desde 1989, donde actualmente es catedrático y director del Laboratorio de Ciberjusticia y además es titular de la Cátedra de Información Jurídica Lex-UM. Funda el Laboratorio de Ciberjusticia en 2010 y debo decir que es uno de los centros de investigación sobre ciberjusticia más relevantes a nivel mundial, no solo en Canadá, sino a nivel mundial, y absolutamente pionero en todo lo que se refiere a la ciberjusticia. En la actualidad dirige el proyecto Autonomía a través de tecnologías de ciberjusticia e inteligencia artificial, un proyecto hasta 2026, integrado por un equipo multidisciplinar e internacional de más de 50 investigadores. Antes dirigió un proyecto también internacional en el que participaron más de 23, casi 25 universidades, repensando el derecho procesal towards cyber justice. Fue director del Grupo Estratégico Derecho, Cambios y Gobernanza, que también reúne a más de 50 investigadores entre 2006 y 2014, y ha sido director científico del Centro de Estudios e Investigaciones Internacionales de la Universidad de Montreal. Es abogado y en 2016 recibió del Colegio de Abogados de Quebec la distinción Advocatus Emeritus. Fue además titular de la Cátedra de Investigación de Excelencia Alexander Coiré en 2019-2020. Es colíder del Grupo de Investigación Derecho, Ciberjusticia y Ciberseguridad en el Observatorio Internacional sobre los Impactos Sociales de la Inteligencia Artificial y la Tecnología Digital. Es experto en el desarrollo de programas de buena gobernanza en África y el Caribe. Además, en el año 95 fundó la revista electrónica Lex Electrónica, que fue la primera revista jurídica online en lengua francesa. Pero no solo es un grandísimo experto en derecho y tecnología, en inteligencia artificial, sino también es un referente en temas sobre derechos humanos y libertades, sobre derecho público en general, sobre derecho constitucional y sobre la historia del derecho. De hecho, publicó en el 2009, en 2008, un magnífico libro sobre una posible historia de la norma, las normativas emergentes de la mundialización. Además, en 2021, aparte de otras muchas publicaciones, ha publicado la obra Artificial Intelligence and Law, A Critical Overview, que es un libro colectivo que hoy es referente en el estudio de la inteligencia artificial en el Derecho y la Justicia. Querido Karim, thank you very much again for coming. Para la academia y para la cátedra es un honor contar contigo y estamos encantados en poder escucharte sobre un tema capital. Consideraciones sobre la gobernanza de la inteligencia artificial y aplicaciones concretas en el ámbito del derecho y la justicia. Tras su intervención, daremos paso al debate para poder dialogar con el profesor Benjeklev. Saludo también no solo a los que están hoy con nosotros en la sala, entre los que veo muchas caras conocidas del máster en protección de datos, transparencia y acceso a información de la Universidad San Pablo CEU, así como del grado del título propio en Derecho Digital e Innovación, alumnos y antiguos y brillantes alumnos, y saludo también a los que nos están siguiendo en streaming. Pues lo dicho, querido Karim, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Buenas tardes. I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon in this beautiful city of Madrid. And I would like, of course, to thank Señora Roca y Trías and Señor Piñar for the organization of this event. It's very much appreciated. And of course, Rosario Huazo-Calés, inter alia, the chargé de mission of the Cyber Justice Lab in Spain, the connector. Muchas gracias a todos. My presentation today will address some general consideration on the governance of AI, artificial intelligence, which is now, as you know, the object of considerable stakes among nations, and especially among the hegemons, the US and China. AI governance is partly based on its regulation. And in fact, a race for regulation seems to have begun in the world. AI raises economic and strategic issues of prime importance. And the importance of these issues transform a question that could have been simply commercial into a formidable strategic confrontation. The US has been on this strategic path for some time, and in this regard, the Trump administration is simply acting out in the open. The American will for strategic superiority in technological matters is not new, even if it was sometimes more discreet than it is now. So let us now address this important question, which are, of course, at the heart of a possible governance of AI. AI regulation is trending right now. Around the world, several regulatory projects have been put forward and some adopted, such as the European AI Act regulation, with a view of implementing a framework for global governance of AI. However, if we take a step back, we might wonder whether global regulation and governance of AI is really possible and effective, given the considerable strategic and commercial dimension it implies in a fragmented world marked now by a heavily transactional approach to interstate relations. There is no doubt that these days, digital technology has become a strategic issue in power relation between states, and AI is a central piece in the actual world chessboard. A central piece, even if recent doubts have been expressed about the return on investment of AI companies, especially regarding the Chinese startup DeepSeek, which has shown incredible results for a fraction of the investment made by OpenAI and others. The appropriation, control, and ultimately domination of and by AI would give states a strategic advantage in both geopolitical and geoeconomic terms. Geopolitics, as you know, refers to the dynamic processes by which spaces are restructured by power relationship, power competition, alliances, and solidarities that play out on the international stage. Until very recently, this struggle took place mainly, if not exclusively, between Westphalian states and was confined to the geographical areas delimited by national and regional borders. Geoeconomics, for its part, is concerned with the geopolitical issue that arise on these fluid borders, which are no longer restricted to a delimited geographical space. competition between powers is no longer only about territories and political interest, even if it is still. It's also about dominating foreign markets and controlling sectors of activity deemed strategic. In this respect, the emergence of the internet, cyberspace, and e-commerce challenges the monopoly or even the ability of states to regulate so-called post-Westphalian borders alongside transnational groupings, extraterritorial communities, large platforms, and key digital players. The players claim increasing autonomy from the legal control of nation-states, and it's legitimate to ask who really controls cyberspace. Alongside the American national champion, GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and others, of course, other national digital giants compete on the international stage, such as China, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and so on. In a way, the digital giants have become the mercenaries of the web and of a multipolar world. Whether it's a question of mastering technologies, the economy of being able to regulate every aspect of social life, the digital titans, though a priori private players, have assumed a central role in the global market, effectively monopolizing the sectors. This is evidenced by the panoply of antitrust proceedings initiated worldwide, notably by the European Union, for anti-competitive practices. Some are quick to describe this ceding of power to private economic agents as a Copernican revolution in geopolitics, in which statocentric orthodoxy would be replaced by a GAFAMO-centric system in which states would be relegated to the rank of orbital constellation, the mere backdrop of a stage in which the major American IT companies would be the main players. The technological expertise of the major digital players can be mobilized both to police cyberspace and to build a metaverse in the image of our civilizations. Far from leaving these technological resources untamed, governments are seeking to control them, to establish or maintain their preeminence, and to defend the acquired advantage of the digital giants that are their national champions. And it is a very difficult contradiction to reconcile. On the one hand, regulating these champions at the risk of restricting their international deployment, and on the other hand, letting them run wild at the risk of upsetting the internal socio-economic relation of the state itself. Prior to examining the race to regulate AI, it is first necessary to put in context the race for hegemony through AI, in which several states are engaged to a significant extent. States are seeking to gain control over AI by relocating this strategic resource, in particular through export controls for strategic technologies, data localization requirement on national territories, as well as protectionism justified by national security concerns over a multi-purpose technology. The result, rather than the ideal of a global village, is the balkanization of cyberspace. Let's start with the control of strategic technology export. The advent of dual-use technologies poses an additional challenge to the regulation of the arms trade. The dual or multiple use of smart technologies make it difficult to maintain the balance between national security and innovation incentives. The fact that the private companies developing these technologies do not, as such, belong to the national defense sector, nor are they controlled by government, makes it difficult for national authorities to monitor the activities of these companies. Think about Palantir, for example. It's a good example. At international level, exports of arms and dual-use technologies, as well as the arms trade, are mainly governed by two multilateral regimes. These are the Wassenaar Arrangement and the Arms Trade Treaty. The Wassenaar Arrangement is a multilateral regime set up in 1996 and to date has 42 participating states, including the US, the countries of the European Union, the UK, Canada, Russia, and Ukraine, but to the notable exclusion of China and Israel. Since 9/11, the Wassenaar Arrangement has also targeted the arms trade with non-state actors, and in 2013, the arrangement was amended to include internet-based surveillance systems such as Pegasus. The Wassenaar Arrangement has been codified in several national legislation, including a new European regulation of 2021 establishing a union export control regime. That said, many question whether the arrangement stated aim of contributing to the international security by promoting transparency in the exchange and transfer of conventional arms and dual-use technologies can be achieved. It is indeed very difficult to control deep packet inspection technologies that permit electronic surveillance and are developed based on consumer market product. Some people note that before and after Wassenaar, the international arms trade between signatory countries did not change, nor was it subject to any significant restriction in terms of economic interest. As for the Arms Trade Treaty adopted in 2013 by the UN General Assembly, it aims to be a truly binding multilateral instrument to regulate the international trade in conventional weapons. Today, the treaty has 130 signatories and has been ratified by 83 states. Even though the treaty was adopted only after bitter negotiation, it should be noted that the control of dual-use technologies has since evolved and must take on new forms in view of the transversal penetration of these strategic technologies in several sectors of the economy, some of which do not exclude, of course, the use of AI. Some commentators go so far as to assert that controlling foreign investment must now be part of the strategies used by states to control the arms and dual-use technologies due to the versatile nature of this technology. Data localization. Let's now turn to the protection of personal data, and more specifically to data localization requirements, which have been identified by some as constituting non-tariff barriers. Localization requirements are multiform and include national requirements which either require data relating to individuals to be physically stored and processed on national territory, or allow data to be transferred across borders only under certain conditions. There may be different types of data or categories of individuals subject to this requirement. In any case, the instant consequence of legal requirement concerning data localization is the repatriation of technological infrastructure to national territories. They contribute to the trend toward fragmentation in cyberspace. Since the responsible development and deployment of AI also relies on the availability and analysis of massive data, the localization of this data is essential to guarantee that states have control over AI. We know that, even in the absence of an explicit ban, the transatlantic flow of personal data between the US and European Union remain unclear until very recently, since the European Court of Justice invalidated the personal data transfer agreement that had been negotiated between the EU and the US in the Schrems II case in July 2020. A European Commission adequacy decision was only issued in July 2023 relating to the transatlantic privacy framework adopted to address the concerns raised in Schrems II. But remember, in 2017, the Office of the United States Trade Representative called data localization a barrier to digital commerce and a threat to freedom in cyberspace. But today, we must nuance this affirmation. Until very recently, the US constantly upheld the principle of the free flow of information, but from now on, however, this flow may be restricted or interrupted in the name of security imperatives. This exception to the free flow of information has always existed, but today, national security, especially in the US, is subject to a very broad interpretation and includes activity that at first glance appear benign. Thus, for example, the circulation of information of a commercial nature may be restricted. And this trend emerged under the Biden administration. In the new NAFTA, or the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, which is not in a very good form, under this agreement, which came into force in July 2020, the parties are prohibited from prohibiting or restricting the cross-border transfer of information, including personal information by electronic means, if this transfer is part of a commercial activities carried out by a covered person. The agreement adds that a party cannot require companies to locate their IT facilities in its territory as a condition for doing business in that territory. This, of course, has everything to do with US domination of the cloud computing market. Moreover, the US demand that TikTok, American users' personal data, be localized on its territory for reason of national security clearly demonstrate that the principle of free flow of data is more a rhetorical device than a strict legal or ethical requirement for the hegemon, the US. And under the Biden administration, let's remember that the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Control Application Act was adopted in January 2025, forcing TikTok to sell itself to American interest. The prominence and multiple use of technology in human activity raise national security concerns for government. The notion has been invoked in three distinct contexts: state security in the strict sense, different forms and modalities of foreign interference, or as a justification for protectionist measures contrary to free trade. Today's major digital companies are going so far as to emancipate themselves from state control and privatize certain means of waging war. The current Russian-Ukrainian conflict is a striking example of how the involvement of large private companies in the conduct and management of armed conflict can no longer be underestimated. Despite the destruction of the internet infrastructure and the jamming of GPS signal by the Russian army, Ukrainian troops were able to use the satellite internet service, Starlink, offered by the American company SpaceX to maintain essential wartime connectivity. More discreetly, Google, for its part, deactivated the live traffic function in Ukraine on its mapping and geolocalization service. These are private companies that not only openly take sides in armed conflict, but have also the effective capacity to participate and influence the course of events. Even without openly taking a stand, the simple inaction of these large digital companies is not without consequence for the course of certain armed conflict or even civil wars. In addition to state security in the strict sense of the term, national security also refers to the raison d'etat, whereby the political interest of preserving the state, the prince, or the sovereign takes precedence over all other considerations. The national security exception is, of course, essential to safeguard certain national interests. This being the case, in the absence of a precise definition and thereby avoiding strict judicial control, the expression national security can become a thousand-headed hydra that can justify arbitrary, even contrarian position, which, under cover of state secrecy, can be removed from all criticism and discussion. In this respect, it should be noted that the multiple uses of AI makes this technology sensitive to certain national security allegations. We can think first of those smart weapons that evoke the use of AI in disinformation campaigns. This use illustrates the role of the intelligent web as a new geopolitical agent alongside activist journalism and traditional media. What has attracted the most attention from government and the public alike are the influence and disinformation operations carried out during elections. Artificial intelligence techniques such as deepfakes, voice cloning, and automatic text generation can be used for malicious disinformation, propaganda, and manipulation. That said, it is worth bearing in mind that the media's influence on public opinion needs to be put into perspective. According to some studies, informal discussion have a greater influence on political opinion, especially among the undecided, than more formal source of information, such as the media. A study of Twitter's feeds published in 2023 found no significant relationship between users' exposure to Russian intrusion in the 2016 US presidential election and changes in voting behavior and political attitudes. So it remains to be assessed to what extent, to the exclusion of other factors, this intrusion would otherwise have caused second-order effects, such as questioning the legitimacy of the first Trump administration or general distrust of the electoral system. But it's not just the Russian or the Chinese, but also Western countries that engage in disinformation. Sometimes even among themselves. Take Germany, France, for example, where the Germans, via foundation, have financed an anti-nuclear discourse in France, in connection, of course, with the price of electricity and the greater competitiveness of French companies in terms of energy cost. So the scope of influence of the internet web extends beyond electoral misinformation to social movement and financial market. You can read it on the screen. Election are one example of the many domains where this can occur. Financial market can be manipulated, which can be the subject to short-term manipulation. Foreign affairs could be affected as rumors spread quickly around the world through digital platforms. And of course, social movement can also be targeted through dissemination of false information. Other researchers also questioned the vectorial role that social network could have played in mass mobilization. The cognitive effect of social networks is itself not enough to obtain the satisfaction of demands in the absence of a physical contestation to act. That said, the omnipresence of social media contributes to citizen participation in the popular movement of our time. In addition to smart weapons, another facet of this geopolitical struggle is the control of exports of certain technologies or raw materials to countries deemed at risk, and restriction on imports from these same countries on the pretext of national security concerns. Under the first Trump administration, and I'm sure some of you recall it, the US did invoke the national security exception to justify imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum imported from Canada and the European Union. The US believes that import of steel and aluminum would pose a substantial risk to the ability of domestic industry to produce steel and aluminum for critical infrastructure and national defense, especially in time of crisis. These protectionist measures were challenged by several states parties, including Canada, before the World Trade Organization, which rejected the US claims in a series of related rulings issued on December 9, 2022. The panels considered that the US concern did not pinpoint to a situation of sufficient gravity at the international level to constitute wartime or a case of serious international tension within the meaning of the gap. Remember that the steel and aluminum were coming from allies, Canada and the EU. It was not coming from elsewhere. The US reaction was swift and unequivocal. And I'm quoting, the US strongly reject the flawed interpretation and conclusion in the World Trade Organization panel report. The US has held a clear and unequivocal position for over 70 years that issues of national security cannot be reviewed in WTO dispute settlement, and the WTO has no authority to second-guess the ability of a WTO member to respond to a wide range of threats to its security. In the same press release, the US openly states that it will not comply with the decision. The Biden administration is committed to preserving US national security by ensuring the long-term viability of our steel and aluminum industries. As some commentators have pointed out, it is unusual, to say the least, for a WTO member to openly refuse to obey a WTO decision. And I'm quoting here again, "It is not unusual for the WTO members to criticize rulings where their measures have been found to be inconsistent with WTO obligation. Nevertheless, compliance rates in the WTO tend to be very high, if not always very swift, including for the US. What is unusual is for a WTO member to issue a public statement on the day a ruling is circulated, indicating directly that it will not comply with a ruling. The US openly hostile reaction risks seriously undermining the future of a multilateral trading system as the WTO. And in fact, the future of the WTO is quite bleak. We must also remember that this statement was issued under the Biden administration. The recent declaration of the Trump administration are part of this trend which set aside the principle of free trade. In addition, the Biden administration has banned the export to China of certain type of semiconductors, chips, which the aim of depriving China of the computing power needed to train AI on a large scale. But we see that it was with very little effect, with the example of DeepSeek, who is once again quite an achievement. Anyway, in the same vein, in March 2021, the Federal Communication Commission deemed Chinese companies like Huawei, ZTE, and others to pose an unacceptable risk to US national security. And in the wake of this, the Canadian government did the same, which is retrospectively a mistake. Another topical example is the TikTok saga. Several government authorities, the Canadian one, for example, following the footsteps of the US, have expressed national security concern over the control of TikTok by a parent company, ByteDance, based in China. From legislature to the media, public discussion seems to have been fueled by mere allegation in the absence of any hard data on the matter. For example, many have expressed fears that TikTok's recommendation algorithm could be controlled and manipulated by the communist Chinese government for propaganda and disinformation purposes. However, the ability of recommendation algorithm to influence public opinion remains to be demonstrated. Such recommendation incline mainly to reinforce existing opinion and preferences. Indeed, recommendation algorithm seeks to reach users who are already receptive or who share conviction of the same order as the propaganda context, the bubble. You are into a bubble. Even if recommendation algorithm can be rewired to expose users to a wider range of content, even against their express interest, it is likely that the popularity of such platform and hence the effectiveness of their influence operation will decline of its own accord. In fact, the use of data collected by TikTok for purposes that would compromise national security can only be used insofar as the data itself, a priori, concerns national security and has been shared in such a way as to expose sensitive information. However, the data collected by TikTok relates mainly to the entertainment habits and interests of its users, and its value is above all commercial, in that it permits the implementation of social media advertising strategy, as Professor Milton Mueller of Syracuse University has shown, and others also. If there is a threat to national security, it would be a risk common to all platforms. And this risk would not be mitigated by banning just one of many platforms. What about Facebook, Instagram, X, etc.? These protectionist examples confirm that AI is a major strategic challenge for the US. After all, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, which is part of the Defense Department in the US, the DARPA's mission statement is, and I quote, to make pivotal investment in breakthrough technologies for national securities. The race to regulate AI. So far, we've seen how states seek power through technology and AI in particular. But the race doesn't stop there. What about the normative power of states? This is initially being eroded by the intensive lobbying of national legislators by the digital giants to defend their private interests. This lobbying manifests itself as much in terms of budget spending as in the penetration of GAFAM employees into the art of public administration, or what we call regulatory capture, confusing industry interest with the public interest. According to some, AI could even in the future fortify this targeted influence with legislators with both its increased ability to produce versatile text in a convincing human-like way and the advent of a new form of lobbying that is AI-assisted. In this vein, the technological expertise of the digital giant is essential for implementing a regulated cyberspace. The interest of government in dominating AI is well established. Will they succeed? Beyond economic domination confirmed by private national players, there remains the desire for domination through regulation, or at the very least, control of AI through regulation. In this battle, the European Union, which lacks industrial capacity and global digital companies, intends to exert its influence through regulation. Especially since the emergence of large language models, LLM, such as ChatGPT and others, calls for AI regulation have been multiplying. Risk-based regulation seems to be favored by some, as in the AI Act, and in Canada we have the same approach, the risk-based regulation. It would fall somewhere between a restrictive regulatory approach, with the risk of choking innovation, and laissez-faire and its abuses. On the model of the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, and the AI Act, this regulation requires an extraterritorial scope in order, of course, to be effective with regard to digital players established in third countries, but whose activities concern or are likely to affect the rights and freedom of citizens within the territory of the Union, or which may even remotely affect national interests, such as the national security consideration. Beyond AI, the development of extraterritorial jurisdiction is the fruit of the process of globalization, whereby national interests are no longer exclusively confined within national borders. In any case, to be implemented, the risk-based approach presupposes, like the AI Act, a compliance model based on technical rules standards subject to audits and certification. It is not clear that such a model can reflect the legal requirement relating to fundamental rights, nor of permitting their full realization. In any case, the main question is whether genuine and effective regulation is possible in a context of international competition exacerbated by consideration of national security and the will to power. Regulation has been introduced, as you know very well, in the European Union, but how far will it go? Will it have a significant and real impact, or will it very quickly come up against the sustained, even categorical reticence of the American hegemon if it limits in any way the field of action of American champions, Google, Amazon, and so on? The American champions, have become more vocal since Trump's election and have expressed disdain for the AI Act and other European legal instruments such as the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act. But maybe if EU regulation of AI is limited to an approach based on compliance, it is then possible that will not arouse the hostility of the US. Indeed, compliance imposes constraint of an administrative, even bureaucratic nature to which companies are accustomed and which only marginally limit their ability to act and maneuver. But alas, it is far from being certain, given the arch criticism of American companies and their hostility at bureaucratic controls. The French economist Elie Cohen, among others, was skeptical about the effectiveness of this normative approach adopted by the European Union. In an interview with Le Monde, Elie Cohen has this to say, and I am quoting him: Europe has surrendered its industrial sovereignty over hardware to the US and its industrial sovereignty over platform, software, and services to GAFAM, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft, and others, of course, and essentially American companies. The intelligent use of standards must be backed by industrial power, public commissioning, and market control. So will being a standard-setting power enable Europe to build an industrial and technological powerhouse? The answer is no, say Eli Cohen. One might be tempted to qualify this statement by noting that the European Union share of world trade since 2023, which ranks second just after China and ahead of the USA. And as the business model of the digital giant and the development of AI is based on the amount of digital data collected from businesses and consumers, and the intelligent exploitation of this data, even though the EU does not control the provider of digital goods and services, the economic weight of businesses and consumers of digital goods and services established in the UA is not to be overlooked. Let's conclude this first part, because I don't think I will have time for the second. Anyway, states appear beholden to companies developing AI tools. A lack of expertise and the absence of any effective digital regulation since the emergence of the consumer internet in the mid-1990s explain this position of dependence and subordination of state. We've done nothing for 30 years. The recent advent of regulation from Europe is quite recent. It's remarkable that these companies have been able to literally seize digital technologies that were developed with the support of public authorities in both the United States and China and cement a de facto monopoly over them. The appropriation of technology by private companies is nothing new. But what distinguishes it in this case is the pervasive nature of digital technologies, their total penetration of all spheres of human activity, and the ruptures they entail in the national socio-economic and even anthropological fabric. The mastery of digital technology gives its operators a position of superiority and technological expertise, the importance and influence of which governments are only just beginning to appreciate. In this respect, we know that the geoeconomics is at the heart of recent US action, whether using economic sanctions, routine breaches of free trade principle in the name of national security, refusal to submit to WTO panel decisions, or protectionist measures to allow reindustrialization, etc. And the election of Trump will only reinforce this trend, which announced a transactional and multi-vector world, that is to say, a world where each country only defends its interest and is ready to make agreement with one or the other hegemon, either the US or China, without any reference to the idea of alliance. This model, made up of allies, in fact, belongs to the World War II model, as I'm afraid is now obsolete. For the US, the geoeconomic advantage is reinforced by its dominant position in the international financial system and its dollarization, which allows it to control value chains and a good portion of international trade as soon as the dollar is used in a transaction or a made in the USA component is found in the product or tool being traded. But this advantage will not last forever. The BRICS Plus are already considering not a common currency, but a unit of account for the international transaction of the same nature, in fact, as the one used in Europe in the mid-1950s. Whatever the case, it appears clear that the desire to regulate AI comes up against economic and strategic issues. In the current context of asserting American power, it's becoming difficult to envisage global governance of AI. The competition is now open, and the principle of international cooperation and governance is disappearing in view of the desire to dominate this technological tool. It is sad, very sad, to see that the European Union's effort to regulate digital tools, from AI to platforms, will be strongly contested by businesses. The US will support these and continue on the path it has been following since the mid-1990s, namely an absence of rules in a sector which nevertheless really needs them. And I must give you this precision. This presentation was written before the election of Donald Trump. So, muchas gracias por su atención. Espero que esta presentación haya despertado su interés. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting. Thank you very much. Bueno, se abre ahora el debate tras esta interesantísima presentación del profesor Karim Benyeklev. Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta por hacer. Sí. Pues, no, siéntate aquí y utiliza el micrófono. No se te va a grabar. Siéntete en total libertad y aprieta, por favor, el micrófono. Eso es.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Palantir, and I was wondering if do you see anyone near peer competitors based in Europe, or maybe that closely share European values, in that sense of okay, we have AI and we might need to develop models themselves, but the actual operation, the making AI models operational, it's a bigger problem in my estimation. And are you aware of any near peer competitors?
Well, I'm not thinking about a specific company in Europe, but when we take a look at what DeepSeek did in China, I think that it's very feasible for a European startup, being French, Spanish, whatever, to do the same, especially that DeepSeek did develop their platform in open source. So, and you've got the data here. I mean, you're a big single market with about 450 million consumers. So I think that if you have the will, it will maybe take time. But if we take, once again, the example of DeepSeek, apparently it was developed in less than 2 years. So, and it's very, very, a very good platform. I use it in Canada with, got the chance to have some Chinese students who introduced us to the platform, and it was as good as the ChatGPT-4. So I think it's a question of will, of investment, of course. And if you move forward, especially adopting the open source code, I think everything is possible.
Really, even with Cyber Resilience Act restrictions or like there's an economic shift onto in NGOs that develop such software, and I'm not quite sure if well, maybe I'm not that optimist on whether we can actually develop and actually enable and enhance our open source market with increasing security requirements.
So you think that the regulation in the EU is too restrictive, and it's difficult for a startup to?
No, I wouldn't say it's the requirements are wrongly. I think, well, my personal opinion is that other solutions, or not maybe other solutions, but other tools such as certifications should be emphasized in the sense that if you allow companies to ex ante expose themselves to control, somewhat of a control earlier, and give them more security in the sense of juridical security. Maybe that could be a way, but not necessarily that the requirements are too much.
Okay. Well, I think that the European Union, the European Commission is quite aware of the fact that they are they are behind the Americans and the Chinese, and I hope that they have the intelligence of relaxing the norms. And what I read in the newspaper, Le Monde and so on, seems to me that they are kind of open to the idea of relaxing the norms in order to develop national champions. You have no choice in a way.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Sí.
Thank you, Professor Benyeklev, for being here with us. And I would like to ask, how could we find an harmonization between the possible cryptocurrency from the BRICS plus and the dollar nowadays, and also regarding technologies and artificial intelligence? Thank you.
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I will be able to answer. What I know very little about that, it's like from an economist, or French economist, Jacques Sapir, who was writing, in fact, that the BRICS Plus are developing a unit of account, as the European did in the 50s, before the Treaty of Rome. And if everyone is paying in his own currency, and there is a clear the compensation, and also, and in fact, they are also mentioning that this unit of account will be electronic. And I don't think there will be a possibility. In fact, they say that they are open also to use the dollar. Because when you take a look at what they're saying, especially the Chinese, because of course they own so many treasury bonds, US treasury bonds, so their interest is not for them that the dollar fails. So the idea will be to have an alternative way of handling international transaction through this electronic currency, this unit of, not this electronic currency, but this electronic unit of account, which will be a kind of a basket of currencies, including the US dollar, if it's the will of the actors. I'm not sure that my answer is very clear, but that's the best I can do on this subject.
¿Alguna pregunta más? I'm going to ask your question because I think that we have to take advantage of having you here. Two questions. The first one, and both of them from your perspective from Canada. The first one, you talk about the race to regulate artificial intelligence. You know that there is a controversial between the European model and the American model regarding regulation. Many people, companies say that European regulation is very restrictive. You mentioned even the Draghi report is very critical with the regulation in Europe. The question is to regulate or not to regulate. This is the question. And the option in Europe is to having in mind the fundamental rights, the European principles. What do you think about, what do you think that it could be even the market position in front of the option, the European option to regulate artificial intelligence? First one. And the second one, regarding the Trump position on the international data flows. It seems that Trump is going to derogate the Biden executive order. What do you think about, from not only from Canada, but in general, about the future of data transfers and the future of the extraterritorial application of the GDPR?
Thank you, Jose Luis. So for the first question concerning the regulation of AI, I think that the regulation of AI, the AI Act, was a very nice and very important piece of legislation. In Canada, in fact, we have a project, it's still a project, and unfortunately, I don't think it will become a statute or a law very soon because we are going in election in a few days. But we adopted the same approach, risk-based approach. Because it's very difficult to understand what AI will do in the future. So it's in order to regulate, or in order to elaborate a legal framework, you have, in principle, you have to know what exactly will be the consequence of such technology. So instead of doing that, there is this risk-based approach that has been adopted for a few years now. And I think it's the best approach. And I don't think that, because there will be also, and you will correct me because you are better equipped than me on this field, but I think that there is the AI regulation, but there will be also sub-regulation adopted by a kind of main organization which will be created under the auspices of the AI Act. So they will be able to fine-tune the general regulation in order to avoid impeding the innovation, but at the same time, that's of course a noble desire, to also respect and to implement human rights or general protection of the consumer. So I think this approach is good, and you will be able to, as I said, fine-tune through this organization to this administrative body that will administer the AI Act. Because otherwise, if you do nothing, we will have the problem that we have now with the social networks. We didn't do anything since the mid-90s, 1990s. After the collapse of the wall, the state was not a reference anymore. We said the market is king, and we didn't do anything. Maybe there was the directive on personal data, but it was even before the advent of the internet as such, the public internet. And I think that all states now regret this absence of intervention from a legislative point of view. Because as they said in English, when the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's very difficult to put the toothpaste back in the tube. So now we are living in a world where social networks are maybe not what we would like them to be. So that's the first part. Concerning the free flow of information, that's very strange. For so long, the Americans were saying to the European, your personal data protection statutes are a non-tariff barrier. You impeding the free flow of information and blah, blah, and so on. And now there's a kind of 180 degrees return. Then now they are saying, well, we can restrict the free flow of information for national security imperatives. And in fact, national security imperative, it's fallacious. It's not true. I mean, it's industrial interest that they want to defend. So, well, when in the 70s they were saying to the European, you are defending industrial interests behind this data protection principle, they are doing exactly the same thing. Because I think, and I wrote my thesis on the subject, that I think that the interest of data protection in the 70s was genuine. It was not a non-tariff barrier. It was really the interest of protecting the personal data, especially after the Second World War, horrible experience with the use of register by the German and so on. You know the story. So it was a genuine interest. It was not a commercial one. And now the Americans are, in fact, not saying other things than we are going to defend our local industry by impeding the free flow of information. So it's a 180-degree reversal. It's astonishing, really. I never think that I would have one day lived this experience, which is a sad one.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Pueden aprovechar que tenemos aquí al profesor Karim Benyeklev con la perspectiva de Canadá, un grandísimo experto. Pero vamos, si no más preguntas, pues thank you very much, dear Karim, profesor Benyeklev, por tu magnífica exposición. Yo creo que ha sido una muy clara exposición acerca de los retos de la gobernanza de la inteligencia artificial, todas estas cuestiones que ha planteado con una perspectiva que creo que es muy interesante que tengamos también en la cabeza desde Europa. Y no quería terminar sin antes transmitirles algunos agradecimientos. Por supuesto, agradecer al profesor Karim Benyeklev por haber participado en una nueva sesión de la sección de Derecho a las Tecnologías de la Información y la Comunicación de la Academia. Agradecer a la presidenta de la sección, la profesora Encarnación Roca, por su apoyo a las labores de la sección. Y quiero agradecer también en particular a Rosario Duaso, al profesor Rosario Duaso, porque ha sido una de las grandes artífices de esta sesión, y a Candela Llopis también porque siempre está ahí presente para que las sesiones puedan salir adelante. Y agradecer también a todo el personal de la academia su apoyo y, por supuesto, a ustedes, porque un seminario sin personas que lo atiendan no es un seminario. Y tan solo, antes de concluir, anunciarles que la sección sigue con sus trabajos, con sus sesiones, y el próximo seminario será dentro de muy poco, el día 25 de este mes, el 25 de marzo, al que están también todos ustedes invitados, a las 7 de la tarde, también será acá en la academia. Y el tema creo que también es fascinante. Es un tema al que ya hemos dedicado alguna sesión, y está aquí el profesor Javier Torre de Silva, que participó en ella. Hemos hablado ya de inteligencia artificial y arte. Vamos a volver a hablar de inteligencia artificial, ciencia y arte. Para ello contaremos con, aparte será presidido por la presidenta de la sección, con don Luis Moll, vocal de la sección, con don Fernando Suárez, que es presidente del Consejo General de Colegios de Ingeniería Informática, y luego con un artista, don Felipe García Bañón, conocido artísticamente como Felipao, que nos hablará del arte de la inteligencia artificial. Se hablarán de temas de propiedad intelectual, de convergencia de la inteligencia artificial en las ciencias y en las artes, algunos ejemplos concretos. Creo que será una sesión enormemente interesante a la que digo están todos ustedes invitados el próximo 25 de marzo a las 7 de la tarde. Y nada más por nuestra parte, agradecer de nuevo al profesor Karim Beñeclej que haya estado con nosotros, a todos ustedes, y hasta aquí hemos llegado. Pues muchísimas gracias.